So you actually don't want more money, because if you wanted more money, then a Venezuelan bolivar would be equal to a US dollar. You want what you believe that will give you in your life. And sometimes that belief is a new car or a freedom to travel, but that's what you want the money for.
The following is conversation with Jeff Booth, a successful technology entrepreneur and the author of The Price of Tomorrow: Why Deflation is the Key to an Abundant Future. In this episode, Jeff challenges my assumptions about macroeconomics, cryptocurrency, and technology, and he invites me to fact check him on some things, so I'll do that at the end of the episode. This is the Brad Carr Podcast, and now, here's Jeff Booth. What do you think is causing the inflation that we're seeing right now?
It's pretty simple. It's just manipulation of money. So increasing the amount of monetary units in the world. Money printing. You could call it a different name. There's a whole bunch of ways that is created, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it's manipulation of money to make prices go up, to be able to save a system that was based on debt that can't repay the debt. So the money needs to be manipulated to make the prices go up, to be able to pretend to pay back the debt that is unrepayable.
And you've written that technology could be deflationary. How does that work?
So it's not technology could be deflationary. Technology is deflationary. And so we have two great forces colliding against each other. The free market, which is and technology, the things that we create to be able to save our time, should be falling in price, and that technology is inside of everything, including energy. But it creates a paradox, and the paradox is this: as that productivity is supposed to flow to society in the form of lower prices, the system we live in that is based on expanding credit collapses. So the system that we live in based on expanding credit is being manipulated to pretend that it's solvent. And that manipulation, by pushing prices up when they should be coming down, is what society is going through right now.
And this idea of technology being deflationary, is there a way that we can see this? Is there an index if we were to correct for inflation or something like that? How would we recognize this?
You wouldn't recognize it from within the system, because the system itself, money is important. Money is the thing connecting this all around the world. So if you're measuring from the system that has manipulation, you wouldn't see it. You would see part of it where technology was moving faster. So you would see it in your TVs getting bigger and more powerful each year. You'd see it in your computers offering more value, because Moore's law there is moving faster broadly. But as an overall measure, you wouldn't see the same technology that's come into distribution or housing or everything else, because the prices would be pushed up there faster than the technology was enabling it. So there'd be more and more things. You'd be measuring the entire system from the system, and therefore you wouldn't be able to see what I'm talking about. It's outside of the system. You'd have to design a different system outside of the manipulation of money to be able to see what I'm saying. And
deflation often gets a rap as being a bad thing. What would make that desirable?
So I think first off, ask yourself, why are prices coming down bad for you? Just ask yourself that simple question. Why is that a bad thing?
Yeah. My first instinct would be that large assets, particularly I'm thinking people's homes, people's houses, prices of that coming down would disturb their plans and their vision for their financial future.
Okay. So you have a system that it relies on, let's say houses, relies on an unnatural transfer of theft in money. Unnatural transfer, because inflation is wage deflation, right? So it's exactly the same force. So let's say I own 1,000 houses and I'm renting those out to a whole bunch of people who don't own own any houses, and they're working for wages. That means their wages are going down at the same rate as my houses are going up. And and then I can rent those houses for more. And so their real income is going down. And that's what's happening to society. And then society goes and says, I can't afford this anymore. And they go back to government to create more inflation that's creating the same thing that's driving them into poverty. This is all around the world, and it's based on. So if you just keep following that logic, and you said on your house, you're right. By the way, you're right. House prices would collapse if there was not monetary easing, because we live in a credit-based system, and the credit-based system, people conflate the difference. So they confuse the difference of deflation driven by technology, with good deflation, and deflation in a credit collapse. So deflation in a credit collapse, if the entire thing that is your economy, every bank relies on the credit, and you have $500 trillion of debt that can't be paid back, then you have to drive inflation at a higher and higher rate to pretend that debt can be paid off. And that transfer of wealth from some people to other people, and centralizing function, creates these giant monopolies that you see today, Google, Amazon, and the works, and it creates government that does everything, and it removes the free market, because you have to continue to transfer unnaturally, essentially steal that money from some people and transfer it to others. And but from that system, you have few choices, because no matter who you vote for, left or right, most of the money today to be able to service the debt doesn't come from taxes; it comes from inflation. So if you don't actually have a vote in inflation, does your vote count at all?
How is it that the money comes from inflation? Because it seems that you can track a dollar coming in tax money and then being spent by the government. It's harder to grasp how inflation would be the source of money for the government.
Yeah. So if you have a magic printer and nobody else has a magic printer, and you just make up more units of money, then those flow to society, and the rich get richer first, and the people at the bottom, essentially because of wage deflation, they get poorer. So if you're able to make up, imagine you had Brendan bucks. Everybody was using Brendan bucks, and there was 100 Brendan bucks in the world. If you always had the ability to create 200 Brendan bucks, you would gain, and other people would lose that same function. Or imagine there's $1 billion total in the world, and that's divisible by, and everybody knows how much of the $1 billion they have. And if you have two of those dollars, there's 8 billion people on the planet, and you have two of those dollars, then somebody else has less, right? They have 50 cents or 25 cents. And if you have two of those dollars, and all of a sudden some unnatural authority said, now there's magically $2 billion. If your two didn't go to four, you lost money. But you wouldn't see it, because you would measure in that dollar, and you would think, oh, my two went to three. And so you wouldn't see it. So that's what's happening. So when you grant, and these are pretty simple premises, right? This is really simple. I could have stopped my book at technology. Technology creates productivity. That productivity should flow to society in the form of lower prices. ! Could have stopped the book there, because every other thing that's stopping that is a control function to essentially aggregate wealth at the very top, who then use that coercion to manipulate that control structure. So when you look at politics around the world now, it's largely theater on that control structure. And there's a lot of money in that control structure. If you follow the money, it's not a free market anymore, anywhere in the world. Because once you have manipulation of money, effectively, this is hard for people who've never heard this to understand. Capitalism and communism look exactly the same under printed money, because it presupposes that somebody controls all of the decisions around money, and money is superordinate to laws. And so people are under an illusion that the laws protect them, but just ask really simply, where money is most broken, what do the laws look like protecting the people? You can see all over the world that money is superordinate to laws, and what ends up happening is the people with the most money have the most lobbying ability, and they can buy politicians, and they can get their politicians elected, and they have the most ability to control the courts, because they can drag things out forever, or manipulate the courts to a time. And so that money becomes so much more powerful than the laws over time. If we say it's okay to manipulate money, then we're also saying it's okay to manipulate laws, our time, everything else.
On a Bretton Woods system where the United States has what's called the exorbitant privilege, we've got this reserve currency, what would be an argument for using that privilege to have a vision for a better world, and printing money and manipulating these things to enrich the world?
So let's just follow that logic.
Okay.
Right. And say, so for a time, if you had a standard, a Bretton Woods standard around the world, and you couldn't manipulate money, then that would probably lift. If you had a neutral reserve currency, you could lift the world out of, as labor rates went up, as competition, as other countries outperformed and competed, then their labor rates would rise, and yours would fall, right? And it would create a natural competition all around the world, and that would lift society out of the dark ages, or where we're going these days. And it worked for a while. And then in 1971, by going off the gold reserve, and if you look back in the 60s, U.S. taxes were in the 90% range. Yeah, and people don't look. Go look at the tax rate, and so taxes couldn't solve the deficit. And so when France asked for its gold back, to pay the debts in gold, U.S. went off the gold reserve, and they unilaterally said now the gold was backing the ability for governments to spend outrageously, and now it's not. Now we just have a fiat currency. And what happened is they pushed that problem all over the world. So that inflation rate that kind of was, nobody had a choice. Everything was revalued all over the world, and that pain was distributed all over the world from that reset. So the U.S. effectively defaulted in 1971 on their obligations, didn't pay back their obligations, and but because now you had a U.S. currency underlying all growth all over the world, nobody had a choice. And then to keep the game going, U.S. created essentially the same game on oil. So tied to energy, and to do that, they had to essentially, with shipping lanes and military might, price oil in U.S. dollars all around the world. And if you were excluded from that, if you stepped out, if you wanted to price your oil in your own currency, you were locked out of the financial system of the world. You were sent back to the dark ages, right? Venezuela, a bunch of, and then a bunch of the essentially the U.S. dollar oil system, petrodollar system, was imposed around the world, and that required the U.S. inserting leaders, pro-U.S. leaders, in countries all around the world where the oil was, and that gave. And what that meant for the U.S. is it meant effectively the U.S. could print oil, print energy, and everybody else had to pay for energy. So it gave an advantage to the U.S. And that advantage is shared all around the world. And what it means is other countries need to have very much lower labor rates and U.S. debt. So IMF would go into the country and say, I'm going to save you, and essentially create money out of thin air with an interest rate that country could never get out of servitude. And the IMF would go in with rules that would say, you have to restructure your economy to favor kind of our industries, to be able to effectively strip mine your country with low labor rates. And then once those labor rates were going up and imposed, as those labor rates would go up and they couldn't pay the debt, effectively what would happen is the IMF would go and renegotiate the debt and give more debt on a restructuring of essentially their dollar falling more. So now imagine you owned those dollars, or you were the labor in that periphery country. Those dollars became worthless, and your labor, as opposed to the U.S. labor, just got cheaper. And so what it creates all around the world is U.S. is the buyer, and everyone else is the seller. And that allows that system to persist. Now today, when you say that exorbitant privilege, that means now you have an military industrial complex that has most of its critical components around the globe in now nations that are geopolitical adversaries, and there's no financial way to bring them back onshore because they're way too expensive to be able to produce onshore. So now exorbitant privilege in the U.S. actually turns the other way, and it creates a very big geopolitical risk. But that's the way the world. That is the way the world has worked for a long time, and it's failing again. So that U.S. dollar system tied to oil is in the midst of failing today, because effectively what people are figuring out is now you can't print energy anymore. So if the EU is short energy or Japan is short energy, they can't make it up. They have to buy it, and as they print more money, energy prices explode.
You mentioned a geopolitical risk for the U.S. How do you see that possibly playing out?
There's in a world with so much, with a world 500 trillion in debt that cannot be paid back. You can just and I would have your listeners go look on Google and just look at $1 trillion versus $1 billion versus $1 million. Go look at that, and how much that'll blow your brain. And so the large numbers we don't comprehend very well. Exponential patterns we don't comprehend very well. So if you have an exponential pattern, two exponential patterns, one driven by technology moving one way, trying to make things cheaper, one driven by money printing the other way, trying to make things more expensive. What you could say is expect the unexpected, because you're driving greater and greater instability in the market, and people are lulled into a sense that it's stable because it's always looked that way. But it's driving incredible instability into the world, and in those, World War I started out of that instability. And because it wasn't solved, World War II started out of that same instability. And Bretton Woods was supposed to solve that, and it didn't. So you could say we're still World War I hasn't ended.
Jeff, for you you're a successful tech entrepreneur. You're based in North America. You seem very well connected. What would get you interested in this topic when it seems that you would be one of those folks who could find clever ways to ride this out?
So there is no, if you're in the system that's failing, no matter where you are, no matter who you are, if you're in a system that's failing, then you fail too. If you're building your house on quicksand, your house sinks. And so for me, why I was really interested in this topic is because I'd always built technology companies. And my first technology company, the it took about $5 million in a year and a half to be able to build this logistics software that today it is cute. That and that software today is completely free. I could use that software anywhere on my phone for free. And 20 years ago, it took $5 million in a year and a half to build. If you see how fast AI, artificial intelligence is moving, if you see how fast some of these trends are moving, it actually just says, okay, so prices should be falling at that rate across society. And if they don't, the world's going to be going to war, and probably, and not just war. We could potentially destroy our species in the transition from one system to another, because if money could be manipulated for personal gain, whether it was by a person or a government, so a nation's gain at the expense of somebody else's, or a person or a king's gain at the expense of their servants, then human history says it will be. But that we have never had the technology through human history that we have today. And so we've never gone through an event like this, a currency crisis like this, where 9 nations had nuclear weapons. That the fight for control to try to control currency could take humanity on a really poor path. My why is looking at my kids and saying, I want a positive future for my kids. That's my why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to your personal story too, you wrote that you learned from the sudden loss of your brother as well. What did that do to? What did you learn from that, or how did that inspire you?
I just say that every single person makes a difference. Mm-hmm. We remember people. That why we cry at funerals is because we remember that person's impact on us. And so you could either think about that in a negative way, or you could think about making that positive impact every day. Mm-hmm. And try to touch every single person around you in that way. That's what life is. And it's the positive impact you touch on other people, a lot of times without even knowing you made the impact.
Mm-hmm. So what do you see as some of the positive actions now that people can be taking given this sort of situation that we've laid out?
Well, first, that's why I become very, very, very strong proponent of Bitcoin, and to understand how I got there is probably just as important, because when somebody first looks at Bitcoin, if they're measuring from a system with manipulation of money, then you have to assume that all money is information, right? So you actually don't want more money. And because if you wanted more money, then a Venezuelan bolivar would be equal to a US dollar, right? It's just a piece of paper. It's a unit of a piece of paper. And you don't even want more the digital representation of that unit. You want what you believe that will give you in your life. Your belief of what more money will give you in your life. And sometimes that belief is a new car, or a freedom to travel, or my family will do better than other families. But that's what you want the money for. So the information describing that feeling is what money is. It's just information. So it makes logical sense then, if money, the information, is being manipulated at an exponential rate, at a rate we can't even comprehend because it's in the trillions and trillions of dollars each year, then the information throughout society must have misinformation in it. But we're in that system, measuring that system through the misinformation. And what you see throughout society is you see everybody thinking they know the answer of why that's happening, because money is being, so you see society ripping apart everywhere. and it feels uncomfortable, and it feels what's going on. And every single person you talk to is in their own little tribe saying it's those people's fault. It's those people's fault. And it's a logical conclusion from the manipulation of money, or the manipulation of information, which creates misinformation everywhere. And the only way to control that is actually add more control, because no human would actually vote for that system. So you have to force them into compliance in that system eventually. It's what China's digital yuan does. It's the lockdowns in China. After it consolidates that power, that's what it looks like. And so that's what society all over the world is going towards. And out of their pain. So a lot of people, if you had wage deflation, if you can't pay your bills and you have fear and you don't know the reason, then you're likely to vote for somebody who's going to say it's those people's fault and I'm going to give you more money. So everything, our actions are actually reinforcing the system that we're in, making that system more dangerous for all of us. That's what's happening. And you'd also have to assume, though, that, and then now I'll go to Bitcoin, and I know how that system is built, all of the plumbing of that system. And I understand it at the plumbing level and why it looks like that and the human nature that drives that. I don't think it's this grand conspiracy theory. I think it's just incentives ruling the world and feeding back on themselves. And there's a new system that's completely outside of that system, that cannot be attacked by that system, and that's Bitcoin. Not cryptocurrency, not anything else, only Bitcoin. And for those, I won't go deep into the weeds on this podcast, but if people want to go deeper on why, if they look up an article I wrote called "Finding Signal in a Noisy World," you can do the research on specifically why only Bitcoin and what that would mean for the world. But Bitcoin is outside that system, and it's unhackable from the existing system. Nobody can stop it. It's more decentralized today, more secure today, and getting more and more and more. So if there was a system that we lived in that was 10,000 times bigger than Bitcoin, and had this money and had this power, you could expect Bitcoin to have attacks everywhere, right? Misinformation attacks. You'd expect either that to fail, or it to be, or the misinformation about it to be wild through that system. So that's what you have in Bitcoin. And Bitcoin's working on a network effect, and it's literally a technology, an open technology. And you could do your own. You don't have to trust me. You can audit this. You can run your own node, and it brings stability to money, and it brings truth to money. And so, and nobody gains, and what that means is, measured in Bitcoin, prices will fall forever of everything. But measured in your existing currency, it'll look like prices are going up. And it's and because what people are doing when they're measuring Bitcoin from their currency, they're using the mismeasurement to measure Bitcoin. So and that fix creates, and that's the base layer of Bitcoin, and that's the asset, that's the Bitcoin, but it creates a new base layer of a peer-to-peer internet that brings truth, hope, and abundance to society, is really what it does. And the existing system we live in has to bring fear, misinformation, and coercion to society. Just structurally, it has to. So that's why I become a big Bitcoin advocate, because nobody can change the rules.
It's interesting that there are a number of folks who are advocates for Bitcoin who have maybe come into it relatively late, considering that it's been around for 13 years.
13 years. Yeah.
And yet, what I see with other cryptocurrencies, I live in Los Angeles, I hang with a lot of folks who are in tech, is that they pop up and there are immediately people who are early movers on it, who are very excited, and I have so many free items of clothing that are marketing for other cryptocurrencies, sweatshirts from Solana and hats from Polygon, because it seems that they're more like venture-backed startups that are just trying to get the word out and to scale. What is the distinction between the scale of use and the network effect?
So so I will go a little deeper. So if you think about our blockchain, blockchain trilemma, and you can solve two of three sides of a blockchain: decentralization, security, or scalability. And you have to choose two of three. On each layer, you can only solve one. So let's just imagine Bitcoin comes out and it solves decentralization and security, right? And for it to withstand all of the attacks from the existing system, it would have to be decentralized and secure, because if it got hacked, it's over. Fair? If it got centralized, it's over. So designing for decentralization and security would open up a natural vector for others to solve. Let's just go through the versions. So because it's open source, I could fork over my Bitcoin, new Bitcoin, and call it Jeffcoin tomorrow, and make and trick a whole bunch of people because so many people early on Bitcoin made so much money that Jeffcoin was going to be successful too. But now let's go into Jeffcoin and say, how could it have, if it was the exact copy of Bitcoin and it started later, then by very nature, it must be more centralized and it must be less secure than Bitcoin. Fair? By very nature.
It must be more secure and more centralized.
It must be less secure.
Less secure and more centralized.
More centralized, because it started later. It started as me, Jeffcoin.
Okay. Versus right. the way that...
versus 13 years of building on Bitcoin and all of the security and decentralization, all the nodes that are protecting Bitcoin, mm-hmm. It would start later. So it has to be. So let's play that one to the ground. So you have the exact same utility with less security and more centralization. It can't work, right? Because why would somebody use it other than trying to make a quick buck?
Would there be a trade-off for speed or?
We're going to go to that one next. I'm saying, so we have to go through each use case and understand why.
Okay.
Right? So the first one is like Dogecoin, right? But that's what it is. Yeah. It was a joke coin, right? That is effectively a cut over Bitcoin's code to be able to create bunch of wealth, but it has to fail, right? Because same utility and less decentralization, less security. So now let's go into, we have a massive market of effectively fraud, printing money in the overall world, and people are desperate for more money. And you have this technology that came along that's decentralized and secure, but because it's decentralized and secure, because it only does 5 to 7 transactions a second, because of that, then it opens up somebody to create scalability, right? And you could, but by solving scalability, you have to sacrifice security. Let's go with that one first. So let's go through all the Solana hacks and everything else, right? Mm-hmm. So I solve scalability, but it's insecure. It has to fail, right?
Okay.
Is that it doesn't? If somebody doesn't think so, then they'd have to tell me the reason that it wouldn't. But if you wouldn't build a new peer-to-peer internet on something that was insecure.
Sure.
Fair? Yes. So could you gamble on something like that and maybe make enough money if you were in it at the right time? Potentially. Could you create a VC fund and sell a whole bunch of hats to pretend a whole bunch of other people so that they gambled their life savings on it and you got rich? Sure. But it has to fail over time because of the security flaws. So it's not a long-term business. Now let's use the other example. Let's say you instead of sacrificing security, you sacrifice centralization. You sacrifice decentralization, and then so that would look like Ethereum. And And what you told people when you did that is Bitcoin's old tech. Mine scales faster. Mine scale and people could build on top of it and do a whole bunch of fancy other stuff on top of it, NFTs and a whole bunch of things on top of this. But by very nature of my design, it has to centralize. And that centralization of the function means, how could you have decentralized finance on top of a centralized blockchain? Is it an oxymoron? Right? And so all of the nonsense, all of it, it's built on, notwithstanding some of the entrepreneurs are building on top of it, don't know that they're building on top of quicksand. But you would never, just the economic rationale for using a blockchain on a centralized design makes no sense. You would use a database, right? Amazon and Google are not going to move over their databases to Ethereum because it would cost more, right? And so once you see that, you realize that centralized function, not some of the early investors in that or the people who are promoting them, not that they couldn't get rich, but they have to get rich on the backs of other people getting poor. So they literally all fail from the design structure alone. They have to. Only Bitcoin stands, but I can empathize with people because they haven't done the work, and so they're sitting in a system that's 10,000 times bigger than Bitcoin through misinformation, seeing other people get rich, desperately needing money, and saying, "Me too." And you could just, through human nature, you can understand why this all happens and why people get eviscerated through this. And even it's even worse because most of those crypto exchanges that are selling 20,000 coins, they get paid in and out on all those exchanges, and then they design their own coin to be able to push that asset price up to pretend how much money they have. And you're seeing this in the FTX collapse, and you're seeing it all over crypto. But they're getting wealthy on a fraud, and their fraud depends on conflating Bitcoin with other crypto. And their fraud depends on all of the money that they essentially steal, lobbying governments to conflate Bitcoin and crypto more. And it's easy. It would be easier. So you take a company that is getting rich on like Binance on something like that, and you say or FTX before, and it's easy to believe in the fraud when all of that money is flowing to regulators and it's flowing to politicians and it's flowing to it's very easy to perpetrate that fraud on society.
So if Bitcoin could serve as this sort of off-ramp from, say, a dollar system, how is that playing out in places like El Salvador that seem to be running both in tandem?
So I've gone down to El Salvador.
Oh wow!
So I've spent time there, and what you'd hear from Bitcoiners is it's used everywhere, right? And what you'd hear from the traditional media is this is a terrible place, and both aren't true.
Okay.
And it's early in an experiment. It's early in not an experiment. Bukele knows what Bitcoin is, and it's going to provide freedom for the population. Their economy grew by 11% last year, one of the fastest growing economies in the world, because of tourism and Bitcoin. And the amount of people that are moving there now and building businesses there because of Bitcoin is staggering. So you'll hear the financial press say they're backwards $50 million on their Bitcoin investment. Bitcoin's down, and completely miss that their economy grew from 26 to 28.5 billion dollars in a year because of Bitcoin. And so again, the misinformation. I wanted to go down and see for myself. And when you see for yourself, when you see kids in school going back to school because of Bitcoin, when you see instead of joining a gang.
Oh, okay. How is the relationship there to Bitcoin and not joining a gang?
So imagine you could. I'll use a different example first. Bitcoin taxi driver. All he did is said, "I'm going to accept Bitcoin, and I'm going to call myself the Bitcoin taxi driver." Really great guy, super. He was dirt poor, poverty. He now has, I think, 4 cabs and people working for him because everybody that goes looks for him. And so you're creating these businesses opportunities just by the very nature of trade. And now I met so I went to one of the schools. One of the schools, the head of the school told me this story that a lot of the kids go to gangs. They recruit from the schools and everything else, and the kids don't want to, but there's no hope for anything else. And he told a story about these 2 brothers that wouldn't go to the gang, but then their mom got cancer, and they couldn't pay for the medicine, so the gang becomes where they go. So we forget that economy, that the ability to pay for food, we forget the ability to pay for the things we need, food, medicine, the clothing, how important that is in everybody's lives. We think we live in this system of privilege because we've always had it. We actually don't look at that negative externality of us was in El Salvador. Because they living on a US dollar system that you're manipulating your currency down forces you into generational poverty and forces out of that violence. Because everybody is looking to how do I support myself and my family, and so when you now introduce something that you can actually remove that generational poverty, you can give people options to be able to create businesses around hope for a better future. You see the best in humans come out, and so that's what you're seeing. It's early in El Salvador, but that's what you're seeing, and that's actually why people are traveling there now, and that's why and visiting and opening up new businesses there.
Wow, it does seem driven by the wealth of people from outside of El Salvador coming in a lot of ways. I wonder what makes it distinct about Bitcoin specifically being there. If El Salvador was on ETH, and then people with ETH came in, and then there was the ETH taxi driver, would that be different?
It would have to be a centralized system. Mm-hmm. And so the ETH system would look a lot like the system we live in, controlled by the rulers of ETH. Mm-hmm. So would it work for a while? Yeah, it would work for a while, but it would be subject to the manipulation of the rulers and their rule changes, similar to the system that we have today.
I see. And we're talking about folks who have these sort of working class jobs, something like a taxi driver. That sort of job could be eventually automated out by self-driving cars and things like that. In your vision of deflation through technology, what do you see for folks who have jobs like taxi drivers?
So, and I think it's not just taxi driver jobs. Go look up OpenAI. You can do a query on OpenAI right now. Mm-hmm. It'll write you an essay that is a college level essay.
Oh my gosh.
So all white collar jobs too, and I mean it'll do that for free right now. You could set up a query on any subject, and it'll do that for you. It will create better content than you could create right now. That's artificial.
That's a
bummer. And so it can also create different avatars that look like real humans and everything. So now you're moving into a stage where you won't know whether the person you're talking to is a real person or an AI, which is kind of staggering. And you could get really scared of that. And then you could get scared of the job losses that are going to come from that. And you could get scared from the taxi driver jobs are going to come from that. Or you could say, really simply, there's two choices. Either all of that productivity gain flows to us in the form of lower prices. That is what Bitcoin is. And it's distributed to the world. The abundance is distributed to the world. Or we could live in a system that concentrates all of that power. The jobs are going no matter what. And instead of the jobs going and prices falling, prices are going to rise, and you're going to be controlled by the supreme ruler. Those are unfortunately the choices. And so I would just prefer, and if you think about what the World Economic Forum policies and everything would do, what would it look like if you what if we both came to the same conclusion at the same time? Technology is eventually going to remove most jobs, and there's two ways to solve that dilemma. One, we should manipulate money faster so the people in control can look after the stupid people. Right? It's one possible solution, right? And you could believe your rhetoric because people wouldn't be able to look after themselves. We have to look after those stupid people. Or two, which my book describes and what Bitcoin does, is we could let prices fall so that they don't have to work as hard to be able to provide for their families. It's really two different versions of the world. And right now we are living, so people that are in Bitcoin and moving in Bitcoin are in one version of the world, and that's what they're seeing. And most of society is in another version of the world, and they're getting scared and more scared because the version of their world is moving in the direction I just said.
For folks who do find a sense of meaning and status in their work, and you being a seasoned technology entrepreneur, where would you suggest people look to orient their work and their labor?
I would say look into technology. So you have what's happening on Bitcoin. You have an invention of a new peer-to-peer internet with money inside of it. And what it means, it's going to break every other business model. It's going to break Google. It's going to break Facebook. It's going to break all of these business models and reimagine them and actually distribute that power to other people. And as it does, prices are going to continue to fall. And so if I and why I started a venture fund in this space and investing in entrepreneurs in this space, venture capital funds called Ego Death Capital, is when you see what opportunity is here. And what I actually cannot believe I get to play in this. The best entrepreneurs in the world building on top of the Bitcoin ecosystem, and it's so early in this ecosystem. I think so. The question would also be to my kids. I want my kids to learn a lot about what's happening in Bitcoin. I want them to understand the technology. I want them to understand what you can do with it, and now what you can do on layer 2 and 3 with it, because you could create all sorts of businesses that provide value to society and make Bitcoin easier to use. And it looks very similar to what I went through in the 90s and early 2000s, as a whole bunch of existing companies said the internet wouldn't matter, and the internet changed everything. But it looks very similar. So and I've used this on a couple of different podcasts, but if you were an executive at Sears from 1995 to 2010, your view of the world, your whole frame of reference for the world would be everything's getting worse. And if you were an executive at Amazon during the same time, your view of the world, your frame of reference for the world is, wow, everything's getting better. Now superimpose that to the highest level, money, and every other thing that's on top of that. That's what's happening with Bitcoin. If you're in Bitcoin and understand what Bitcoin is, and you're deep enough and you start to get deeper on it, your view of the world is optimistic. And you see so much opportunity in that to bring value to society. And if your view of the world is inside the existing system, it's hard not to get more and more pessimistic.
And Jeff, to this vision of building businesses on this ecosystem with this awareness, that sounds a lot like the vision that some of my friends who are in other crypto-related startups and things have. What are you seeing that is unique to Bitcoin? Because it seems the argument is often that Bitcoin is slower and things like that, and that we need these new crypto technologies to then build.
Yeah, perfect. So that's where people. I already went into the decentralization and security. So we already know Bitcoin is at a base layer, decentralized and secure and unhackable and such. Many people in crypto think because of that 5 second speed. Essentially, they're not seeing Bitcoin as a protocol. They're seeing it as a company, and the other companies as companies instead of protocols. And what ends up happening in technology is built in layers. TCP/IP was actually developed by DARPA in the 60s, but it wasn't until HTTP in 1989 that opened up the internet. Right, the connection of all the web pages to each other could catalog the information and connect to computers. So nobody talks about TCP/IP. They don't talk about HTTP either. They talk about the internet, and that internet sits on top of a stack that gets hardened and hardened over time, and you can't see what's available until the next layer of functionality comes in. So Bitcoin is that first layer of has to be secure, critically secure, and they harden over time. And because you wouldn't want to build the next layer on top of something that was quicksand. So the next layer that's emerging right now, if you look at Lightning, look at the growth of Lightning and the speed of payments and the cost of payments on this network. And if you don't,
what is Lightning for those who don't know?
It's a next layer on top of it. It's a technology protocol on top of Bitcoin, and it comes down to Bitcoin every 10 minutes. Download wallet of Satoshi would be a simple download, and send and have somebody send you outside of the existing financial system Bitcoin, measured in whatever currency you want, and it'll happen in a fraction of a second, and it'll happen for less than a penny, and when you see and there's no visa fees on it, it's unstoppable. Because it's outside of the system. I can trade with anybody anywhere in the world. And when you understand that every single person that's starting to use that system is making that network effect stronger and more powerful for every other user, that's why you see an explosion of growth on top of this. So if you watch Lightning adoption all around the world, it's remarkable, because now you have a money that's native to the new building internet, that is freely available to trade anywhere in the world, and nothing can stop it for fractions of a penny. And then on top of that, and things are being built, Taro, Fediment, other different pieces. And remember, just like the internet before, TCP before, you don't see. People typically look backwards instead of forwards. So they're mismeasuring the most important feature of Bitcoin, which provides its decentralization and security, as a flaw instead of the benefit, because that's the base layer. And then they wouldn't see that what's available on the next layer until the layer is there. So you wouldn't know that if you were looking backwards. If you're creating something with scalability that had to sacrifice decentralization to get to scalability, you wouldn't know that that the layer on top of Bitcoin could solve the scalability in a layered system without sacrificing the core. And so you'd still be talking about Bitcoin as old tech can't do this. Well, the new thing started to emerge. And that's what's happening today. And it's very early in the new things are emerging, the different layers coming onto Bitcoin, but they all reinforce onto a base layer that's completely decentralized and secure.
So to make sure I understand this, then for entrepreneurs, you would suggest rather than starting a new crypto, to build a new layer on Bitcoin,
or a company that completely changes the game that is currently played by utilizing one of the layers that's already there. So Lightning payments is going to revolutionize the finance industry completely. It's the energy industry as well. And so we're investing in companies that have all sorts of ideas that they're taking this out to the market. And so you get to play in a world that you're seeing what the future is going to look like on top of this network. And it's incredibly exciting.
Wow. Well, Jeff, before I ask my last question, where should folks look for you online to learn more about this?
I just say follow me on Twitter. Twitter probably the best at Jeff Booth on Twitter.
Great. We'll put links to your Twitter and to many of these other resources that you've suggested along the way in the description for people to check out.
Sure.
And Jeff, my final question is, with all of this change coming, what do you think people can do at a personal level to prepare themselves?
Create the future you want to create. So spend your time not complaining about the world you live in. Spend your time building the world you want to live in. It's probably the simplest thing, and for me too, the start of the venture fund was a realization that I could complain or talk about this all day long, how the existing system is going to fail and the pain it's going to create, or I could spend more of my time and energy with the people I loved and wanted to spend more of my time that are building the future. And so it was almost a selfish thing that creates an opportunity as well, because I just spend my time better. And every single person has that autonomy. So every person listening to this could tomorrow, today, whenever you post this, start to learn more about this. If they find the same thing that I did, that it's inevitable anyways, then they could say, where do I want to place my time to create more of an opportunity in here, and where do I want to learn? What value can I deliver to be able to create value for others?
As promised in the beginning, here's my fact checking. So Jeff mentioned 90% taxes in the 1960s in the United States. And according to the Wikipedia page, History of Taxation in the United States, there were marginal tax rates as high as 90% in the post-World War II era in the US. He mentions OpenAI writing essays, and yes, there's a video that I'll put a link to in the description from the Wall Street Journal describing ChatGPT, that's OpenAI's technology, and how it can really write essays. Jeff talked about a technology called Wallet of Satoshi, used to send payments over the Lightning Network. I looked that up. Yes, it exists on Apple and Google app stores, and they claim to have made over 5 million payments already over the Lightning Network. That's all for the fact checking. To wrap up this episode, here's a quote from the last page of Jeff's book. Our lives are defined by the positive impact we have on others. And with that, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe.